Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulullah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Just wrapping up this book, inshallah ta'ala. So it's about politics, our favorite topic. But even though I've got nothing to do with it, but it's a topic that everybody is concerned with and has an opinion on. But there are Islamic injunctions regarding siyasa or politics. And this is the book of Mufti Taqi Usmani. Actually, it's a group of lectures, a round of lectures that he gave on this, because there's a lot of misunderstandings about people mix up different things. So he's going through the ahkam. So went through how a ruler, what type of ruler is selected, how is a ruler appointed. So one of the legitimate ways of rulers appointed is through the consensus, all the ittifaq of the Muslims, like Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu, like is appointed. The other one is through a council of a few people or a lot of people. Usman radiallahu anhu, 6 people were dedicated, appointed by Umar al-Khattab to choose Usman radiallahu anhu. Or it could be a large group of people, and he said in the last session, section of this chapter, it could be like a parliament or a senate or whatever you want to name you want to call it, but basically the group of people appointed or known to the people, Ahlul Hal wal Aqd, the people that are the decision makers of that society. They can get together. You might call it democracy, you might call it a council, you might call it a parliament, congress, whatever names, but basically a group of people, decision makers of that society. The next one is istikhlaf. Istikhlaf means that a person who has been appointed as a legal ruler nominates his successor during his lifetime. The latter can also be called the waliul ahd, the heir apparent or crown prince, right? This is a term used today. The term waliul ahd is most often used in relation to monarchic rule, but its meaning can be extended to cover that of istikhlaf. Right? Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu thus nominated Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, and shortly before his death. In other words, he nominated him as the next caliph, as we've already seen. There was no election or voting or a council for Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu. Before Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu passed away, he said he will be the khalifa. He appointed Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, and he said, I would have nominated Abu Ubaidah ibn Jarrah as the next caliph had he been alive today. From this we learn that istikhlaf is permissible. However, 3 points must be kept in mind in this connection. In the first place, istikhlaf is not to be a hereditary matter. For when Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam prayed to Allah to grant him his offspring leadership, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala replied to him, La yanalu ahdi al-zalimin. My covenant does not extend to the wrongdoers. And when Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu appointed his successor, he declared, I have not appointed any of my relatives. There is consensus among all the Sunni Muslims on this matter. Alam ibn Hazm says, rahimahullah ta'ala, there is no dispute between any Muslims on this point. That is, it is impermissible for the caliphate to be made hereditary. Secondly, if the caliph desires to nominate his successor, it is legally wajib upon him to have due regard for the conditions of the caliphate. He must select the best available person, and this selection should take place after consulting. You can see even Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu saying, I would have chosen Abu Ubaidah, but it already became like he's already passed away. Did he pass away at that point? No, he didn't. If he was, then I would have appointed him. No, Umar radiallahu anhu said that, right? Umar radiallahu anhu said, I would have appointed him, that if he was alive. So therefore, they were sifting through the people and said, yeah, he's the best person to do this job, whether Abu Bakr or Umar and so forth. If a caliph is in such a circumstance appoints any of his relatives, this will be due not to their mutual relationship, but to the qualities of the nominee. It is possible, coincidentally, that the relative might be the best, but he might be the one he's been a governor, he's been put into position, because he knows him, and he may be worthy of it. Like, it's possible, like that. So it's not mutually exclusive, right? It is nevertheless better to avoid this, so as not to give others a reason for hatred, calumny. We have already seen how Sayyidina Abu Bakr and Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu were careful to observe this principle. According to one account, Sayyidina Umar even said to the person who had suggested that he appoint his son as his successor, and he said that ما أردت Allah bihada, because you have no intention of pleasing Allah with this. So someone gave him an opinion to Umar al-Khattab, you should appoint your son Abdullah bin Umar radiallahu anhu. And Abdullah bin Umar he was the son of his father. Abdullah bin Umar radiallahu anhu, I always mention this in the durus, that he's the Sahabi that the senior Sahaba, because he was young, Abdullah bin Umar son, Umar bin Khattab's son, but he was considered, even Aisha radiallahu anha, others considered the person who had the most istiqamah after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Meaning that whatever Rasulullah left him on, he maintained that despite all the ups and downs and political upheavals and fitan and whatever came and good times and bad times, he was on the straight and narrow and he stayed on the standard of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. He's appreciated among the senior companions of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam for his extreme istiqamah, steadfastness. So he's not anybody, but when the person gave him the opinion, he said, you do not intend Allah, the pleasure of Allah by this. Like you're doing it for some tribalism or some loyalty to a person, as opposed to looking at the best person. Sayyidina Usman was martyred and he had no opportunity to nominate his successor. Sayyidina Ali was advised to nominate his son Sayyidina Hassan as his successor. When people asked whether they should pledge allegiance to Hassan, Sayyidina Ali replied, I neither command you nor forbid you to do so. Your view is the best. Hassan radiallahu anhu was the best person at that moment. But he didn't want, because there's two things now. He cannot, it creates indecision, right? Like on one side, yeah, there, but then he creates other. And he could see what would happen. The supporters of his supporters, what they would make that into, they'll make it into something other than it. And it did. There's people that made it into something else. He also said, I shall leave you just as the noble Prophet ﷺ left us. The way Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu was chosen. In other words, none of the rightly guided caliphs, may Allah be pleased with them, all nominated their sons, nor any of their relatives to succeed him. Sayyidina Muawiyah radiallahu anhu was the first to appoint his son Yazid as crown prince. Here it should be kept in mind that he did so considering this to be the most beneficial and solution for the Ummah. He had no evil intentions in doing so. Like Ibn Khaldun writes, Ibn Khaldun is Muqaddamah, this is a masterpiece of like Islam, right? It's a worthwhile read. There's a very good podcast, YouTube channel, Historiun, Muslimun. You know, so there's a brother from UK, I think he's Nigerian if I remember correctly. He goes through the Muqaddamah. He does class and so forth. I think it's Alim, Sheikh Ibrahim or something his name is. It's really, really good. Like he goes to Muqaddamah and really makes it relevant. And he said sometimes he'll disagree with him. Like he said, Ibn Khaldun is considered the first sociologist, psychology. Like if you read it, he's like a genius. Like studied anthropologist, studied human nature. He said, and he said a very interesting point. Sayyidina Muawiyah radiallahu anhu is dealing with a very large kingdom, or khilafat, you want to call it, Muslims ruling a very large land. The Muslims have never ruled that much. The Banu Umayyah, it was an Arab dynasty, it became an Arab dynasty. It is the maximum that the Muslims ruled under a single ruler, right? And Sayyidina Muawiyah radiallahu anhu, and when you have such a complicated bureaucracy, replacing an outsider, bringing an outsider into it is very not easy, because you won't survive in that. You know, there's a lot of piranhas and sharks, you know, in that tank. You know, so he knew that this person is by his side the whole time. Now, Yazid, there's extremes. Ulama have discussed this. I'm not going to go into that thing. We're in Muharram, you know. So we're in Muharram still. No, Muharram is finished, right? So it's close to Muharram. But he's like there's one extreme about him. He's like, he is like curses him for what happened in Karbala. And then there's the other view that it's no, a lot of this is just made up stuff afterwards. You know, and he wasn't directly involved in it. So there's a whole historical thing in it. So the neutral stance is basically like some of the stuff that is against him cannot be verified. It cannot be 100% verified that he's like they're deserving curses, right? But he kind of ended up on the wrong side of history, sort of thing. That's the long and short of it. But however, Muawiyah radiallahu anhu did appoint him, and he was. And Muawiyah radiallahu anhu didn't appoint him necessarily. And yeah, people can change after they're appointed, isn't it? You know, there are people that were very nice people in the mosque that became rich. You know, there's people we've seen our own eyes, like people change. Somebody stopped coming to the mosque. My father, rahmahullah, is imam here. For those who don't know, 30 years, and he said he came. He said, "Where's so and so?" I said, "You know, he's got busy work and this and that." He stopped coming to the mosque. He goes, "No, money came and he's gone." We lost him. We lost it. Another one bites the dust, you know. So we lost that one, you know. So people can change. So he at the time, because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam trained his Sahaba, right, including Muawiyah radiallahu anhu, and they had taught that lesson: إِذَا وُسِّدَ الْأَمْرُ لِغَيْرِ أَهْلِ فَانْظُرِ السَّاعَةِ. If the matter is entrusted to people who are not fit for it, wait for the hour. So he's done his job. based on all the available evidence and so forth, he judged and so forth, and this person, he knows he's a capable administrator, and he handed it over to him. Muawiyah, so Ibn Khaldun writes, Muawiyah likewise named Yazid as his successor, fearing lest differences should arise among the Muslims. For Banu Umayyah was not willing to surrender this matter to anyone but themselves, and had to be nominated anyone, and had he nominated anyone else, they would have disagreed. Apart from that, he considered Yazid suitable or righteous, salih, and no one should doubt that to have been his view. This is his view regarding him, is that this is his view, and he considered him the best person for the job. One cannot think otherwise about Sayyidina Muawiyah radiallahu anhu. Had he believed his son to be a miscreant, far be it from Muawiyah to have nominated him. And just understand, Sayyidina Muawiyah radiallahu anhu is like, if you, they say if you want to understand the siyasa of the Arabs, there's 4 people, and they're all from Banu Umayyah. Muawiyah bin Abi Sufyan, Yazid bin Abi Sufyan, the brother, not the son, Yazid bin Muawiyah. Yazid bin Abi Sufyan is a Sahabi, is a brother. Mughira bin Shu'bah, and Amr bin As radiallahu anhu. He said, if you want to, these are like considered like the genius, strategic thinkers of the Arabs. And Muawiyah radiallahu anhu was such a disciplined mind. I remember there's a book by Shaykh Abu Hassan Nadwi rahmallah, it's called Mukhtaratul Adab. In that, one of the chapters is about Shaykh Abdullah, one of our teachers, he was reading this with us, the daily schedule of Muawiyah radiallahu anhu, like his daily timetable. It's very interesting that he is a governor at the time and Khalifa later on, and how he spent his day. Like the Mus'haf will be brought for him to read his daily portion of the Quran, his hizb, and then he would have somebody standing next to him reading. He would have someone standing next to him reading the stories of wars, like the strategies of wars, of what they did, the tactics. Like someone just standing narrating to him just to be sharp. Like during his lunch, he would have like, when the food is put, while having his lunch, it's like 40 or something decisions were made. Like he would take a morsel, make one decision and send it off, then have another morsel, like just while he's eating, let alone sitting for the meetings, sitting for the job. So he was a very unique person, to the point, and the proof of his like capabilities, that he's the only governor of Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anhu. Umar bin Khattab used to rotate his governors, but Muawiyah radiallahu anhu was kept in Sham throughout his whole Khilafah. So he's a very unique, like he was a unique leader of the Muslims and among the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. And for Umar bin Khattab was not an easy person to work for, probably, you know. He was very disciplined, and a sense of amana was immense on him, and Islam spreading under his watch, and then have this person there. And even when he went to Sham, Muawiyah radiallahu anhu was dressed very, like nice clothes, and Umar bin Khattab arrived in Sham with, like he arrives with these patches and so forth. And he said, like there's a contradiction. The Khalifa Amir al-Mu'mineen is dressed like that, and he is a governor. And he said, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, there is spies of the kuffar, the Roman, because it's recently conquered Roman Byzantine lands. And he said, and they come and look, they should not see us in a position of weakness, right? And Umar Khattab was happy, like he pleased with his answer, because he wasn't wearing nice clothes because, for the sake of it. He gave a reasoning, a rationale behind it. He goes, no, they should not see us like in a position that thing. And Umar Khattab he's a person of strength, right? So he appreciated, like there was a thought went into his decision making, and he kept him as governor. So the people have bad thoughts about Muawiyah radiallahu anhu or the decision he made regarding Yazid. This is inside your head. Like you got to understand you're talking about the brother-in-law of Rasulullah, you're talking about Sahabi of Rasulullah, a person who's tried and tested, not by anybody, not by like the drivers are. People they've gone through like the most severest checks and balances for them to be in that position, and he, with his decision, appointed him with his firasa, with his understanding. Now, like if you want to form a view on whatever opinion that you have, that's your opinion, but history tells you something else. And if you really know the person and who they are in all the situations in their life, then you should read their life and understand. Just you read their daily schedule and you appreciate like what type of administrator he was. Like really you have to read it and just reflect on it, the psychological profile. Like there's a million videos on like Steve Jobs and whatnot, what type of person and his daily thing and his discipline. We should read about these people. These people, they have the ultimate title, radiyallahu anhum wa radwan. Allah's pleased with all of them. Someone said, there's difference between Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu and Muawiyah differences. One brother said, it's a very Australian way to deal with it. A guy came in the mosque, we're in another mosque, and he started talking again to Muawiyah radiallahu anhu and this and that. And said, this brother from the other side of the mosque, he goes, mate, two people had an argument 1,000 years ago. It's none of your business. What are you so upset about? In Melbourne, it's like first the whole person. And once you understand his whole life, who he is, and his manaqib and his position before Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. My cousin's son, he did this like nasheed, not Pakistan. He says, look at Muawiyah with the eyes of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Don't look with your own eyes. Look at the way Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam looked at him. Then you'll know. Then you put brakes on. Be careful who is Katib al-Wahi, a writer of revelation. He just take notes of Rasulullah. He used to write the Wahi. He's a brother-in-law of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He's a companion of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Ibn Khaldun points its strength by the fact that Sayyidina Muawiyah radiallahu anhu made the following dua during a khutbah. O Allah, if you know that I have appointed him because I truly think him to be worthy of it, then fulfill this appointment for him. But if I have appointed him merely because I love him, do not fulfill the appointment for him. Even then he was questioning, like he's publicly, still there's a question. Hafiz Shamsuddin al-Dhahabi and Allama Jalaluddin al-Suyuti rahmullah recorded this dua on the authority of Atiyah ibn Qais. O Allah, if you have appointed Yazid as my successor, because of the merit I have perceived in him, then let him attain what I have hoped for him and aid him. But if I had induced, if I was induced to do so only by the love that a father has for his son, that made me do so, and he is unworthy of what I did for him, then take his soul before he can attain this office. But in fact, is that in dua against his son's life, right? But the fact is that this step has proven detrimental. But the fact is that this step has proven detrimental to the Ummah. It became a much misused example that caused the caliphate to become hereditary. There were some breaks in between, but for centuries followed, the caliph was appointed in this manner by birth, and it proved impossible to return to the exemplary method of the electing the caliphate that had been laid down by the Khulafa Rashidin previously. I have discussed this issue in my book, Sayyidina Muawiyah and the historical truth or facts. This is in Urdu, I think it's been translated in English maybe as well. So there's a book that he wrote specifically on this, about Sayyidina Muawiyah radiallahu anhu and historical realities. The third point is a question: what is the status of istikhlaf? Is it binding on the people afterwards or not? Experts on Islamic politics hold different opinions in this regard. Some hold that an istikhlaf done by a rightful caliph is binding on the people, because any order that he gives during his lifetime are valid and must be obeyed. If he decides that a specific individual is to be caliph after him, that a decision must be acted upon. Other experts hold that istikhlaf is not binding, but merely a recommendation or suggestion, whereby the ruling caliph advises that a particular individual be appointed as a successor. Whether this proposal is to be accepted or rejected should be decided by the Ahlul Halal. Comes back to the original method. Qadi Abu Ya'la, great Hanbali Imam in the Middle Ages, adopted this stance in his book Al-Ahkam al-Sultaniyah, where he says, the imamat of the appointed successor becomes valid after the death of the ruler and by choice of the Ahl al-Halal. Right? Allama ibn Taymiyyah rahmullah explained this position further. Likewise, when Abu Bakr designated Umar, he became imam only when the people pledged allegiance after, and showed obedience to him. Had it turned out that they had not acted upon Abu Bakr's radiallahu anhu's will by pledging allegiance to him, he would not have become imam. This stance is further corroborated by the fact that Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu recommended Sayyidina Umar al-Khattab as his successor. He was not relying on his own opinion alone. As it related in Tabari's history, he had consulted Sayyidina Abdul Rahman ibn Auf, Sayyidina Uthman. When they both voiced a similar opinion, he called together all the other Ahlul Halal Aqd and put his proposal before them, stating that he intended to appoint Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu his successor. On hearing this, all those present said, Sami'na wa ata'na. We hear and we obey. Similarly, Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq did not rely exclusively on his own opinion. He assembled those people of his time and presented his view to them before implementing it. Even if it were to consider the appointment of Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu as binding, nobody in this age could claim to be the peer in any respect. The mere thought of such a claim is impossible. Hence, the correct viewpoint is that istikhlaf is actually a kind of suggestion that is subject to acceptance or rejection on the part of Ahl Hal wa Aqd. Even sometimes we misunderstand, we take a mashwara from somebody. Mufti Zarul Khan rahmallah from Karachi said this: making mashwara is not binding. If I seek mashwara, shura from somebody, like some sheikh, some pious person, some good person, someone expert of the field, like, you know, I'll make mashwara for IT from an IT guy, right? And for medicine or doctor, whatever it may be, you know. So, but it's not binding. It's a mashwara, right? It's not like I'm not legally obligated to follow. It's not a hukm sharia. Yes, making mashura is in the Quran. Muslims make shura between each other for small matters and big matters. But ultimately, I have to take the suggestion and then see how can I implement it and if it's good or not. I have to make my own decision. There is a sort of weakness sometimes that big sheikh said, you know, big sheikh is not a prophet. He's not Allah or a prophet. You know, he can give a mashwara, but ultimately I'm responsible for my decisions and my actions. We cannot just switch off our own brain. Allah's given us our own brain and I take advice from the best, and then ultimately I'm responsible. I take the decision. This is how the world works. We take responsibility. Some people misunderstand. They switch their brains off. They go to he's a big sheikh, big beard, whatever, you know, and their own brain they switch off, and for their own life, their own personal life, family life, and so forth. You know your family life better than someone from outside, you know, and there's certain matters should not be discussed outside, even with the sheikh. You know, there's certain things we should only the people in the house really understand. So, and you know, these are how cults develop. You know, cults develop like this as well, where everything is invested into one personality, and that personality is like now he's deciding other people's personal issues to a very like unfortunately intimate level, right? So even this is on a greater saying, and ulama are basically concluding that no, his appointment is still a suggestion. It was the people accepted it because it's Abu Bakr Siddiq, there's not anybody saying. And in the process, he's actually asking people, Abdurrahman bin Auf, other senior companions. Right? These people are governors, generals of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. These are not like just like, sometimes we misunderstand who these people, the Ashar Mubashirin al-Jannah. Each one, Sa'd bin Waqqas radiallahu anhu, Abu Ubayd al-Jarrah, each one, the Ashar Mubashirin al-Jannah, but they're not like just people in the corner mosque doing tasbih, you know, like good, like, you know, they're pious, they're the best Muslims of this ummah. They tend that. But each one, if you look at it, they're governors and generals, and they're people of the world. And even before they were Muslims, just to understand, these like Abdurrahman bin Auf, all these young people that became Muslim, like Abu Bakr was older and the other ones were younger relatively. They were from like the best families of Quraysh. You know, all those young that became Muslim, they were like the future leaders, tribal leaders of Quraysh already. They've been groomed into these roles already. Their whole life, this is what they live for. You know, Khalid bin Walid radiallahu anhu was a general and a war tactician, and his father Walid was like that as well. That's all they knew. Banu Makhzum, is it? Banu Makhzum? Is Banu Makhzum? His tribe? Khuza? Makhzum. So they were like war was like, that's all they dreamed of. And that's, so it was like, when it became Muslim, and you see Amr ibn As radiallahu anhu as well, Banu Umayyah, like, they were like, who's the one speaking in front of Heraclius in the hadith of, is Abu Sufyan on behalf of Quraysh, and he said I would have lied, but for the fear of being accused of being a liar. You know, it's a shame for the Arabs, you know, like to be known as a liar, because he stood everybody. He made everybody stand behind. Give me a sign if he's lying, and because he couldn't lie against Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So they were like movers and shakers. Amr ibn As radiallahu anhu, he's the one trying to get the Muslim. He's an ambassador to Najashi. You know, there were amazing people even before Islam. They were like movers and shakers and sharp people and politically astute and so forth. They were not there was like simple people and poorer people that became Muslim, and there's a large, but these people specifically, and look at Umar al-Khattab, Abu Bakr Siddiq, he's taking mashwara decision, counsel from Abdurrahman bin Auf, Usman radiallahu anhu. These are like leaders and generals and, you know, so forth. So I mean, we have a very maybe one-dimensional view of all these companions, but when you read the biographies and the different facets of their life, you know, not just at the tahajjud, like understand all the responsibilities they carried and the conquest that they had at their hand. And that's not an easy thing. Like, oh, he's a general. Yeah, what does a general mean? you take the responsibility of the lives of the people under you. Like not just like, okay, I'm doing payroll, every week, like if I'm managing payroll, doing the budgeting for the organization, my corporate job. No, he's got thousands of Muslims' lives that is an amana on him that he has to answer for if he doesn't. These are the type of people that he's taking counsel from. So, Allama ibn Abidin, rahimullah, who dedicated the whole section of his treatise, Raddul Muhtar, to his question, writes, from a statement of Sharh al-Munya, one may conclude that an order from a caliph does not remain in force after his death. So there's a fiqhi, ulama, they go like very detailed, very deep into like each point. Is his appointment beyond his life? Right? And he said that, and he's quoting Ibn Abidin Rahman, was the great Hanafi scholar of the 18th, 19th century, probably the last greatest Hanafi. Like his book, Raddul Muhtar, is like we call it Fatawa Shamiyah. Fatawa Shamiyah. There's two books in the Hanafi fiqh. My teacher, Mufti Munib Sahib, said, when we were studying with him, he said there's two books in the Hanafi. One is Fatawa Hindiya, which is Fatawa Alamgiriya, Fatawa Alamgiriya, which is, it's called Fatawa Hindiya. And the other one we call Raddul Muhtar. I think that's a subcontinent name for it, the Shami Fatwa. And these are the two, because if you have this in the Hanafi fiqh on your bookshelf, you don't need any other book. And he goes into like each point very like in detail. So from a statement in Sharh al-Munya, he's quoting another book, one may conclude that an order from a caliph does not remain in force after his death or dismissal, as is clearly stated in Fatawa al-Khairiyah, another book. Consequently, if the caliph prohibits the hearing of a lawsuit after 15 years have elapsed, that prohibition is lifted with his death. So these are the next, inshallah, we'll go through it another time. The next one is isti'la, which is forcing one way to the power. So we've got a lot of that in our history. We've got too many of those, mashallah. So is that legitimate? If someone comes into, and we've got not one, we've got dozens and dozens of rulers, our rulers throughout history, maybe hundreds. They've come in different parts of the world. They've come by the barrel of the gun or sword or whatever, So you have to. No. Yeah. There's different names, and it will taghallub, isti'la or taghallub, So we'll go through this next week, inshallah. Inshallah. You want to go through it now? Because we'll start it, and it's 20. We're already half hour, so we won't have. Inshallah, next Tuesday, we'll go through that. Yeah, this is the action-packed one, Allah alam. I'd love to hear your thoughts. We'll go through it next week. But that Historian podcast explains something, He said, real politic is not nice. He said, we confuse our individual good character and, how we should be nice to each other in just social dealings. He said, Ibn Khaldun talks about this, but if we think that that's how the rulers should work as well, And he said that Ibn Khaldun is actually very ruthless. He goes that sheikh, when he's discussing it, actually he goes, I don't agree with him. Ibn Khaldun is like really pragmatic. And he's a realist when it comes to politics. So he said, so we'll inshallah go through it next week. But he points this thing out, because sometimes we as sort of normal Muslims out in the city and in the local mosque and just living our life, we think that like having nice akhlaq in our social life, which is a requirement, that's how politics should run as well. And that requires a very thick skin. Allah give us understanding. And this is important because although we're going into an area that's a bit past the original topic, in politics in general, that politics, there are rules. There's books, Ahkam al-Sultaniyah, is a whole genre of Islamic literature related to this, that on how governance, and there's debates. Is it better to have a good ruler or a pious ruler? Like a very good administrator who drinks and is personally very corrupt, but he's a better administrator. While another guy is mashallah abid and so forth, but he's a terrible administrator. Ideally you have both. But what if you don't have both? Which one is better? So those discussions will come.
Interesting.